How are we doing, everybody? Okay, I've got 50 slides in 22 minutes, so buckle up, Sparkle Farts. We're going deep right now, okay? We're going to talk today about what I call biohacking, biotech, and biomarkers for longevities. I think everybody in here would consider themselves a biohacker. And when you describe this to your friends, they look at you like you've lost your mind. And my point is the things that we've learned as biohackers, everyone needs to do at some point in time. And that's what we're going to talk about in this presentation. And at the same time, I want you to walk away equipped to have conversations with your normal friends and convince them about why it's important that they biohack as well, because it's critical for long term. Now, when we start talking about longevity, inevitably all the research is done in model organisms. But those model organisms are like fruit flies and worms and mice. I want to go to higher animals. I'm looking at mammals. And when we look at an orca that's in the wild and an orca that's raised in an aquarium, what do you see the difference between the two? Anybody? The dorsal fin has been over. That's exactly. So an orca that is raised in an aquarium, there's not enough environmental force on that animal in the aquarium for them to express their DNA. And this is important. And if we take a look, this applies to other mammals as well. If you look at animals that were raised in the old zoos had concrete blocks and bars. The animals lived an average of 3.5 years. They were neurotic. They had digestive problems, much like your neighbor that thinks you're crazy. But this was one of the challenges, that when you put someone in an environment that they're not ready for. The question I have for you is, what side of the aquarium do you live on? Okay, so now we live in environments that are environmentally controlled. We don't have to wear coats if we have heater, we have air conditioning. Our body does not have to adapt to our environment. We live in buildings with stairs. We don't have to climb rocks. We don't have to adapt to an environment. And Homo sapiens, our species, evolved and won the evolution war because we adapted better than Neanderthals. That's why Homo sapiens were successful. We adapted better. Now we live in environments where we don't have to adapt. And this is important. I want you to always think about what side of the aquarium are you on. So biohacking is a relatively new term, but it's an old process. We started packing humans onto sailboats back in the 15 and 1600s. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. How long did it take Columbus to get across the Atlantic? Anybody know? About 32 days, okay? So in 32 days, you can get from Spain to the Bahamas, and you do okay. But by the time we move into the 15 and 1600s, we're moving into the age of piracy, and people are on boats for a very long time. And one of the problems when you pack people on boats, the food that they pack on with them does not necessarily have enough nutrients for them to fully to mobilize what they need. And what do we call sailors that have been on a boat for a long time and they start to develop sores in their mouth? We call them scurvy. It's a vitamin C deficiency. But which sailors did not get scurvy? Does anybody know this? Not all sailors got scurvy. Which ones didn't? The ones that ate the rats on the ship did not get scurvy. Rats create their own vitamin C. So all of a sudden, we have nutritional choices making a difference in the 14, 15, and 1600s. This was the first, but what we saw is the very first biohacking, when someone gets scurvy, we started carrying limes on shit. This is where limeys came from when we talked about the bridge to prevent scurvy. So literally, this was the first time we discovered micronutrients that are necessary for our diet. And as we move through, but as we start talking about longevity, as we start talking about living from 120 to 150 to 180, listen, the biggest challenge to living to 120 is not dying at 80. Okay, that's our challenge. And what we see on this chart here is a graph of how you die. Okay, so when you look at this, down on the far left-hand side of the graph, that's very young. You'll see that first 6 rows is up to about 14 years old. The big purple lines, that's essentially, you need to follow what your mom tells you. Don't stay out late, don't drive too fast, wear your seatbelt, wear a helmet when you ride your bike. The purple that's what that is. It's safety, it's how you die when you're not safe. As we move into adulthood and late adulthood, particularly on the right-hand side of the graph, you see that light blue, dark blue. What that's looking at cancer, cardiovascular disease, inflammatory diseases. This is what's going to kill you when you're 70, 80, and 90 years old, okay? So our challenge for living, if you want to get to immortality, you got to get through 90, okay? That's the first step. So how do we do that? Well, when we look at the inflammasome, the activation of inflammatory markers, when we look at neurodegeneration, when we look at aging in general, cancer and infection and lower immunity, they have one thing in common. That thing that they have in common is called autophagy. Does everybody know what autophagy is? I'm not seeing a lot of hands, so I'm not going to go over autophagy yet. So we recognize autophagy, but as we work our way through the autophagy process, we're learning. Remember, we just gave a Nobel Prize in 2016 to the researcher that described autophagy. This is a relatively new concept. We're just getting on top of it. And as we take a look at autophagy, what we know in the cell, there are multiple things that stimulate autophagy. Heat, exercise, we can take a look at many other pieces, but we start this autophagenic process in the cell. It creates what's called an autophagome. It encapsulates long-lived proteins and organelles and begins to digest them over on the other side when it hooks to the lysosome here, and we get what's called an autolysosome. Now, with the latest pandemic that we had, when you take a look at COVID actually attacks the autophagy process. COVID overstimulates the beginning of this, creating many autophagomes. At the same time, it blocks the linkage of the lysosome to the autophagome, so we don't get the digestion in the final part of the process unless you have upgraded autophagy from other sources. If you're a heavy faster, we actually have a paper out of Berlin that shows human immune cells supplemented with spermidine stopped COVID transmission 85, 90, 92% of the time. So upgraded autophagy leads to improved immune response, and this is where the autophagy process starts to work. Now, we're used to autophagy being in this thing that we call calorie restriction. Whether it's fasting or intermittent fasting, as we limit the number of calories coming into the cell says, hey, we need to clean ourselves up, and it starts that process. We've also seen a thing called mimetics. We know that if we increase resveratrol, based on what Dr. Sinclair wrote in his book Lifespan, we see an upregulation of autophagy. We know that exercise works through this pathway here of AMPK. AMPK is an autophagy stimulator. Metformin works through the AMPK pathway too. So when you take metformin, it's working through the autophagy pathway. Rapamycin is blocking, so where autophagy is digesting the cell, it's breaking down, metformin is building proteins up. mTOR. mTOR is building, so when we have nutrients coming in, mTOR turns on and makes proteins. When we shut this off, proteins stop and we can start to digest the bad ones. Well, we see spermidine over here. We've known about this molecule for a long time. It was first described by the guy that invented the microscope, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, back in 1698. Why Anton van Leeuwenhoek had his semen on a microscope slide, I don't know. The guy was obviously a freak. We should have given the microscope to his wife because he did not play with his toys well, or he played with his toys too much. But we've known about this molecule for a long time, but we've only begun to recognize what it does. We looked at it in cancer in the 1980s, but a researcher in Graz, Austria saw that supplementing senescent cells with spermidine returned the senescent cell back to a healthy cell rotation, and this is where spermidine really started to get its feet in the ground. Now, the other thing that we see with spermidine, we have a paper that we're going to publish later this year. If you take a mouse and you fast it, autophagy goes up. If you take a spermidine knockout mouse and you fast it, no autophagy. So we're getting ready to move autophagy from a mimetic down into a critical element in the autophagy pathway. Now, if we take a look at blue zones around the world, one of the things that we see in the blue zones, we see high spermidine diets in those zones. They're eating food that they largely raise themselves. They're not using industrial production of their food. We get our spermidine from wheat germ. We can't get wheat germ in the United States that we can get spermidine out of because of our industrial production practices. Listen, If you live in Loma Linda and you're part of the Seventh-day Adventists and you grow your own food, you're probably doing good, okay? That's why you're part of a blue zone. If you're not, we got to look at this as a nutrient. So this is what spermidine looks like. It's what's called a polyamine. So many of you may have heard of a thing called an amino acid. So that is, an amino acid is nitrogens, carbons, hydrogens, and there's an acid attached to it. You break that acid off, it's called decarboxylation, and you wind up with a polyamine, and that's what it is. We have a source of them in our body. Number one, we can form them de novo in the cell when we need them by working through some enzymatic pathways. We can eat it in spermidine-rich foods. Does anybody here eat natto? Any natto? Good on you. Okay, I don't know how you choke that stuff down, but good on you, because it's very spermidine-rich. Or you can supplement it through food. What are the benefits of upgraded autophagy from spermidine? Well, number one, there's tumor suppression. And this all comes from a paper called Spermidine in Health and Disease, which was published in Cell. If you like, we'll send it to you. But we see tumor suppression because the increased autophagy causes that senescent cell to return back to normal, not turn into a cancerous cell. We also see an immune regulation. Again, going back and looking at COVID and other infectious diseases, as you clean the cells up, we see improved immunity. It's one of the benefits from this. We see cardioprotection through the upregulation of mitophagy in the heart. So the mitochondria in the cells in the heart need cleaned up. Our mitochondria has their own DNA. They reproduce on their own. When we need mitochondria, the body signals, they begin to reproduce, but we don't want to reproduce bad mitochondria. We want to reproduce the good ones. So through mitophagy, we clean up the bad mitochondria and we get cardioprotection out of this. We also get a nitric oxide role, so we see an improvement in endothelial stem cells and endothelial cells. So there's multiple benefits there. We have neuroprotection. We have a study that came out of Berlin. Thank you, by the way. We have a study that came out of Berlin that showed the people with dementia who took spermidine stopped the development of dementia. Now, we haven't reversed it yet, but we've certainly stopped it through supplementation. And finally, there's an increase in stem cell production. I don't have light on my screen. There we go. Okay, so stem cells. So if you've ever taken spermidine, about half of our people tell us 3 to 4 weeks they start to see their fingernails grow like crazy and their hair change. That's the upregulation of epithelial stem cells, and that's what's going on there. Now, we just finished a study. We're going to talk more about this tonight. We're doing a press release at 8:30 tonight where we took 10 individuals here in the United States and put them in a 30-day trial of our 6 milligram product. All participants had blood work done prior 15, 30, and 45 days after. So we did blood work 15 days after they stopped taking the supplement. And then the blood tests included 9 measurements of blood sugar, inflammation, and lipids. 75% of all quality of life metrics showed improvement during the investigation. Men's fasting insulin levels improved. All the sugar markers improved. All the lipid markers improved. Our inflammatory markers were largely neutral, which kind of surprised us, but this was a very small study. It's a pilot study, but we were very happy with what we saw. We see glucose improve. We see hemoglobin A1C improve. We saw improvement, again, in all the glucose markers and all the lipid markers. I'm hustling here because I've got a timer telling me I got to go faster. So when we look at spermidine and we look at autophagy, we definitely get all of these benefits here. Whether we are just working with, it goes down to arginine and nitric oxide metabolism, which helps with blood pressure and cardiomyocyte stiffness. Again, so all these things come into play. But I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about the aggregation of marginal gains, okay? Has anybody seen Peter Attia's graph of health and life cycle? You want that to be square. I want to be happy, 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 dead. That's what we're going for in that. And I saw this. This is a graph that comes from the British Cycling Federation. We're taking a look at the effect of the aggregation of marginal gains, doing little things over a long period of time and seeing react. What we see in the blue line, if we make small 1% improvements, it eventually takes off. Do you notice how the red line looks like that graph that Peter Attia shows? This looks like a mortality graph when you just let everything go. Now the question is, are you going to engage on this early, or are you going to wait until there's disease and it's almost too late? Okay, this is the reason we biohack. This is the reason we take this into control on our own. I like to, have you read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? If you haven't read that book, I really recommend it. It's a great book. But in that book, they talk about a speaker coming on the stage, and I don't have the cojones to do this, but they put a jar up, and they put a bunch of big rocks in the jar. And you ask the crowd, and you say, what's the jar? And they put the big rocks in, and the crowd says, the jar's full. And then he takes out and he puts a bunch of gravel in around the rocks, and they put sand in around the gravel, and then he put water in. So this jar that looked like it was just full of big rocks actually can hold a lot more. But the problem is, if I take my jar and I put the sand and gravel in first, I don't have room for my big rocks. So it's about getting the big rocks in the jar, and that's what we're going to talk about in longevity here. So this is the big rocks of the jar of longevity. So in the jar, I consider the single most important thing you can do for longevity is movement. You have to move. This is part of our evolutionary background. We're an orca. The question, are you going to be in the wild or are you going to be in an aquarium? What are you going to do? Now, some of us are stuck in an aquarium, so we have to hack that. If we're going to hack movement, there's a lot of ways to do that. I want to go back one. What are the benefits? Why do you exercise when you exercise? What do most people tell you? Why do they exercise? I want to lose weight, right? That's what everybody says. Bad goal. Worst goal in the world, okay? This is the reason you exercise. Number one, this is the production of a protein that's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is what makes you smarter. Kids who exercise in school, in physical education, are smarter than kids who don't exercise in school because of the production of BDNF. This other molecule that you see here is called anandamide. It is what's called an endocannabinoid. It is a molecule much like the cannabis molecule, but affects part of your central nervous system. Anandamide comes from the Sanskrit for the cool molecule, to be at peace. This is why you exercise, to be smarter and to be at peace, to have anandamide and BDNF. 5 minutes, I'm flying. So when you're exercising, you don't have to bury yourself every time you go exercise. Exercise does not mean Orange Theory, doing George Jetson off the back of the treadmill, or crossfitting until you puke. You don't have to do that. There's huge benefits that come from training in Zone 2. Zone 2 has an incredible mitochondrial benefit that comes with it. You don't have to bury yourself, but you don't know you're in Zone 2 unless you're wearing a heart rate monitor, okay? Heart rate monitors can be one of the single best investments you make for long term because it gives you a scoreboard to look against. When we take a look at these zones, you can live. In fact, my wrestlers that I worked with, the biggest thing we did to move them in is we did boatloads of Zone 3 work. College wrestlers live in Zone 4 and Zone 5. I don't need to duplicate that. Zone 3 moved the needle for us, and they got better. So you can only get that with exercise. You can only see it with a heart rate monitor. Sauna is a great exercise hack, okay? Sauna has benefits equal to exercise. We see this from the Scandinavians. We see this from native tribes. There's a value that comes with exercise. Blood flow restriction training, when we're looking at longevity, blood flow restriction training is important, okay? This is basically applying bands to our limbs, creating a hypoxic environment that also causes autophagy, by the way, but stimulates stem cell production, stimulates nitric oxide. You get twice the benefit from half the work when you exercise blood flow restricted. That's a great hack. So movement, first. Food. The guys that ate the rats didn't get scurvy. So let's figure out what the essential nutrients are that you need and get them built in. Unfortunately, our aquarium is full of sugar, okay? You cannot ignore this, and you have to actively try and separate yourself from that because sugar and alcohol have very little benefit. And when you start thinking about K-calories and thinking about dieting, we think about eating less, right? I want to switch that. I want to start thinking about eating the same amount of calories, but in a shorter amount of time. Where should I aim this to work? There we go. I want the same amount of calories. Walter Longo at USC has done a nice job with the fasting mimicking diet. He shows, listen, you can eat crappy over a short period of time and get a health benefit. It's better to eat healthy over a short period of time, but just eating over a short period of time is good. 1 meal a day, shorten it up, 18-6, whatever. Don't eat all day. That's the big challenge. We do not have a mechanism for measuring autophagy, but we can measure ketosis. So ketosis is when the cell recognizes, hey, I need to produce energy from fat. The byproduct of that is ketones. So using a ketone monitor to see that you get into ketosis is a good move. So food. You cannot ignore sleep. I've heard it here 100 times, but you know what? You can't hack sleep either. You can do things to improve your sleep environment. We can hack exercise. We can hack food, the nutrients. You can't hack sleep. You've got to get the cycle established, and it's critical. You need to measure it. This is where wearables come into play. I think if you want to look at longevity, get a heart rate monitor, get an Oura ring, start measuring heart rate variability, exercise on a regular basis. This is the dashboard that you need to start to see your ability to move. I'm going to move through this pretty quick. The last rock here I'm going to talk about is the rock of light. We have scared our population to the point that no one wants to go outside in the sun, okay? I love the sun. I love melanin. When I am melaninated, I feel great. Now, do I want to go out in the sun? Our rig right now is up in northern Washington. I've not gotten a lot of sunlight. I'm not going to go spend the day on the beach and burn my skin. I'm not going to do that. That's an invitation for a problem. But slow exposure to the sun is important. I love red light, by the way, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. So you see red light. We love red light a lot. My point is there's a lot of things that we can do, but you've got to do things to drive your mitochondria. We don't die when we run out of time. We die when we run out of energy. Energy comes from the mitochondria. Light feeds the mitochondria. Vitamin B feeds the mitochondria. Exercise feeds the mitochondria. This is where these come into play. And at some point in time, you have to take control of this. So the jar I think is the most important part here. And that is, what is your purpose? For me, I've defined a personal mission to help people understand change, so that they can eliminate suffering and contribute to the betterment of well people. That's how I operate. I got 35 years as an exercise physiology professor, but what I'm doing here is helping other people understand change to eliminate suffering and contribute to the betterment. That's my purpose. What is my long-term purpose? I've coached great athletes, Olympic medalists, people like that. My favorite coaching job ever was my daughter's 8th grade field hockey team. I love that. I can't wait to coach my grandkids. And 4 years ago, my nephew qualified for the Florida State High School wrestling tournament. He's a big kid, about my size. I got to go down and wrestle with him. I was pretty good for a day. I wrestled with him. I beat him. Second day, and you could beat me, okay? I was a mess the second day, okay? But I want to be that crazy uncle, that crazy dad at 90 that puts on his wrestling shoes and goes in and works out with these kids. That's my purpose. That's what I want to get to. In the absence of purpose, it's hard. I really love Stephen Kotler's book, The Art of the Impossible. If you're wondering about how to establish purpose, this gives you a great framework for how to get there. Now, finally, as we finish up, and I'm out of time. So the question is, are you re-engineering your aquarium? So this is my old aquarium. So the house I used to live in central Ohio, this was my rec room on the back of my house, 16 by 24. I had a great gym. This was my office. I had a 6-person sauna in my office. I had red light. Again, my wife and I just sold this place. We live in one of these now, okay? But in my bunkhouse, I have an infrared sauna. In my bunkhouse, I have a red light system. We took the dinette out and put a Peloton in. I've got a Concept 2 ski ergometer that hooks to the outside. I've got kettlebells, I've got maces, I've got my tools. I didn't make the move without making sure I had the hacks that I needed for long-term longevity. You have to engineer. You have a dining room that you sit in twice a year, probably max. Thanksgiving and Easter, right? Because you don't even get in there for Christmas, to tell the truth. Get rid of your dining room equipment and put exercise equipment in, okay? You can use that 363 days. If you want to sit on it to eat your Halloween, your Thanksgiving dinner, great. In closing, we live in aquariums. Know that, recognize it, know you have to fight it. We have a great deal of evidence that the process of autophagy is critical for getting past that 80, 90, 100-year-old mark. It's how we get through that and not have it kill us. Treat longevity like an investment. If you've got a 401k, invest in longevity. Invest in physical longevity as well. When we take a look at this, there are key practices and molecules that are necessary for autophagy. One of those is moving. There's a great paper that's called The Hallmarks of Aging, the 9 Hallmarks of Aging. It's a very heavy paper. I don't really recommend reading it because it's thick and heavy. Exercise hits all 9 hallmarks of aging. Okay, all 9. When we move through it and when we take a look at food then hits 6 or 7 hallmarks of aging. Get your sleep right in the absence of sleep. Use light as a weapon, not a defense. Light as a weapon. And find your purpose. In the absence of purpose, there's not enough energy to help you make the changes. Thanks.